Okay, so tonight's topic is facts, facts, and fiction. And we're going to try to dispel some myths. And the first thing we're going to do is talk a little bit about the work of this guy, Dr. Weston Price. He is sometimes called the Isaac Newton of nutrition because he figured out the fundamental laws of what we need to build healthy bodies and to stay healthy. Who was he? He was a dentist who practiced in Ohio in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. And he was well known and very respected. He was published in peer-reviewed journals. He was the author of a textbook on dentistry that was used by the US Navy. He was the head of research for the National Dental Association. So he had meticulous methods of researching, and he was very respected. He even had a lab in his office where he could evaluate the nutrient content of foods. And I just last week found out that he lost a child to a dental infection. So that must have made this near and dear to his heart. He was very concerned because he saw an increasing amount of cavities in his patients. In the children, he would see increasingly crowded teeth, what they called dental deformities, where children were born without enough room for their teeth to be set well, and so they would require extractions or braces. He also came to realize that people that had a lot of cavities also had a lot of other medical issues. And so he concluded that the teeth were a visual indicator of the general health of a person. Now this was a time when the world was opening up. There were explorers that were going around the world and finding populations that had never been in contact with civilization. And after we're done with the presentation, you're welcome to come up and look at our banner that talks about the different populations that Price found. There were, the National Geographic was becoming popular, so Price saw pictures of these people, and he wanted to set out on his own travels to see if these people really existed. You know, did these people with beautiful teeth and beautiful bone structure really exist? And if they did, he wanted to know what were they eating, because he wanted to share that back in Cleveland with his patients. So he set out, and this is only one group of people he found. These are the Seminole Indians down in the Everglades in Florida. And you can see that their bone structure is gorgeous. You look at how wide their faces are. It took Price 2 weeks to talk the elders into letting him take pictures, but ultimately they did let him take pictures, so now we have a pictorial account. So this was when they were eating their native foods, and their native foods included fish, birds, reptiles, and game. And the game down in the tropics are very full of fat. Now, this is what happened when the Seminoles were eating the food of the modern white man, okay? The displacing foods of modern commerce is what Price called them. You can see that the top couple, they had cavities and loss of teeth. And then the next generation, the kids had the dental deformities that Price was seeing back home. So if a picture is worth 1,000 words, I think we have quite a story here. How did the diets differ? I want to give you a minute to read over, because the fact of the matter was traditional diets maximize nutrients and the modern diets minimize them. Okay, so it speaks for itself. One thing that Price did notice was that the total fat content of the traditional diets varied between 30 and 80% of the calories, with only 4% of the calories coming from the polyunsaturated fats, which we've been told for a few decades are heart healthy. Well, that's not what the natives said. Lard. Okay, Americans traditionally cooked with lard, which is a stable, healthy fat, very rich in vitamin D, and like humans, pigs out in the sun will take the sunlight and convert it to vitamin D. We need cholesterol to do that, by the way. So when we use lard and fatty pork products that have been raised on pasture, pretty important where these little critters were raised, then we get the benefits of what the animals took in. Now, lard was the first fat in the American diet to be replaced by partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, specifically by, anybody know what? Crisco, yeah. In 1913, so this was before Price even started his travels, Procter & Gamble, the makers of Crisco, published a Crisco cookbook in which they claimed that women who used Crisco rather than lard, quote, were more modern, more enlightened, had cleaner homes, and children of better characters. So the media deception began, okay? This was strictly an advertising campaign. It had nothing to do with health. It was to sell Crisco. Now, this old advertisement for lard kind of can make you chuckle a little bit. I see a couple chuckles. But lard is a good source of vitamin D when it's from pasture-raised animals. And that's important for mental health. So keep in mind, if you want to be cooking some fried chicken, get yourself some lard from a local farmer that you know and trust.
The Health Hut, located at 3112 Henry Street in Norton Shores, offers a full line of natural and organic groceries, including fresh produce and free-range, hormone-free meats, eggs, cheese, and dairy provided by local farms. Taking pride in carrying products which contain no preservatives, additives, or unhealthy fats, their wide selection of allergen-free foods can accommodate most specialty diets. From frozen desserts and entrees to pastas, baking mixes and cereals, to soups and salad dressings, to chips, candy, and other snacks. The Health Hut. We have your good health in mind.
Which would you rather do, this or this? We thought so. For the jobs nobody likes to do, Batka's cleaning service.
Hi, everybody. Well, Procter & Gamble, when they were trying to find something to do with all their excess cottonseed oil, It was about the time when lamps were going out of fashion and electricity was coming in for light. So they had this huge quantity of cottonseed oil that they didn't know what they were going to do with. So a couple of their chemists were messing around in the lab, and they came up with this. Actually, they were looking for something to grease their automobiles with. In fact, Henry Ford had Crisco as part of his program for lubricating the Model Ts. So they're playing around with this gooey stuff, and they said, you know, this looks a lot like butter. It kind of melts about the same temperature. You know, it tastes awful, it stinks, but if we color it and deodorize it and salt it and sell it, we can sell this replacement for butter. So it was quite by accident that they turned all this cottonseed oil into fake butter. I changed this slide just for you, Lisa. Okay, so we're going to talk a lot about saturated fat and monosaturated and polyunsaturates. And I'm going to try to make it kind of fun and understandable. So, okay, this looks kind of daunting at first, but if you look at it, the way that you number fats is really pretty straightforward. The 16 tells you how many carbons in the chain, and the number after it tells you if there are any unsaturated bonds. So 16,0 is saturated. There's 16 carbons. There's this OH on the end. And so if you ever look at a designation, it's really easy to tell what's a saturate because it has 0 unsaturates. Okay, so this is a 16, this is an 18. Then when you have an 18,1, this has 1 unsaturated bond. See that little double bond there in the middle? So it's not fully saturated because it has an opening. And when it has that opening, when the bond is not saturated, it's vulnerable. So it'll rot, it'll peroxidize, it'll go bad. If you heat it too much, if you leave it out in the sun, if you open a jar and you leave it open, it'll start to go bad. Those are those rancid fats. Now the monosaturates, how many of you are familiar with that term, monosaturates? And what's a good example of a monosaturate? Avocados are high in them. Olive, so olive oil. Oleic, you know, kind of the same root as olive oil. Then we get to these two in red. They're what are called the essential fatty acids. They're essential because you have to get them in your diet. This one has 2 open bonds, 1, 2. This one has 3. The more open bonds that there are, the more these things, I mean, you look how straight this is, but if we look at them in life, they have kind of a 3-dimensional nature. So these are these same 4. These 4, see how these are all 18s? This has no unsaturates, this has 1, this has 2, this has 3. The more unsaturated bonds, the more they curl up. So what does this mean to us? Okay, in our membranes, all of our little cells are encased in a membrane. Those saturated bonds are these little straight guys in here. They're attached to a protein on the end, they're straight. 50 to 60% of all the fats in our membranes are saturated. So we really shouldn't be afraid of saturated fats because most of the fats in us by far are saturated. Then the unsaturated ones, they kind of curl up next to these proteins and they allow the proteins to act as little ports to let things in and out of the cell. And the cholesterol are these little bitty guys in here, and their function is to keep the membranes fluid so we don't stiffen up. So cholesterol acts kind of like a buffer. And we have to have cholesterol in all of our membranes or our membranes don't work right. So to be afraid of or to artificially lower our cholesterol with drugs really doesn't make any sense. It's kind of like cutting off our nose to spite our face. But cholesterol has been vilified because they want to sell us cholesterol-lowering drugs. These two pictures show healthy arteries. If you eat saturated and monosaturated, there's no damage. But if you eat these rancid processed vegetable oils, you can see the tissue turns this yucky, ugly yellow. And all of our friends out there who've had stents and bypasses, this is what their arteries look like. You know, all those natives that Lisa was talking about, this is what their arteries look like. So you want to look like this, you want to look like this. You eat this or you eat this.
Can you go back 2 slides and just give an example of each one of those? No, one more slide. No, one more, sorry. Give an example of food of each one of those, like the palmitic and...
Well, palmitic, being saturated, palm, you know, it's like a palm oil. So, you know, coconut oils, tropical oils are saturated like that, as are all the animal fats. They're going to be saturated.
Okay.
Okay, then as we get it, you know, these are olive oils and avocados and those kind of things. And then these are in nuts and seeds. And if you eat fresh nuts and seeds, they're not peroxidized, they're not damaged. But if you buy, you know, Wesson oil or something like that, even if it comes from a good source, a good seed, you know, a sunflower, a safflower, that sort of thing, it's processed. And Lisa will talk about this a lot more as we go along. But if you eat a fresh, you know, seed, you're going to have, this is going to be healthy. But if it sits around too long or it's exposed to light, it peroxidizes. So these vulnerable bonds get extra oxygens on them. And so you know what hydrogen peroxide does to our hair, you know, rips all the minerals out of it. Well, when these fats get peroxidized, that's what it does to the inside of us. So it wreaks havoc. And that's what we see here. You know, this is what those radicals do.
Glow Sun and Shades, simply fabulous.
You have been kissed by the sun.
Okay, so these are the roles of saturated fats. I mean, these are all like really important things. So it's really unfortunate that Madison Avenue has scared us away from saturated fats, that's scared us away from cholesterol. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about these fatty acids. Now, if you look on this whole page, what do you notice? Remember the nomenclature I just taught you about? Okay, they all have a 0 on the end, right? They all are straight. There's no open bonds in here. So these are all saturated fats. And they're from things like butter, butyric, you know, it's kind of easy to translate that to butter. Caproic, caprylic, these guys are from, and lauric, these are all high in coconut oil. And the cool thing about shorter chain fatty acids, the shorter the length, like below 10, they're liquid. The ones that are at 10 are about at body temperature, they start to turn solid. Then if they're longer, they're solid. But the cool thing about them is you can eat as much of them as you want and they never turn to fat. It's impossible for these shorter chain fatty acids to turn to fat. Your enzyme system will not allow that. So when you eat coconut oil and butter and those kind of things, they turn to energy. They can only turn to energy. They can't turn to body fat. So they're kind of like get out of jail free fats. I mean, they're nothing but good. They can only give you energy. They can't drag you down. They can't hurt you. It's unfortunate that they've been vilified. So this is a role of these what are called short and medium chain saturated fats. one of the things we see quite often is people have candida. And we have them take, a tablespoon or two of coconut oil every day, and it works as good or sometimes better than even like diflucan in killing off candida. I tried to tell my mother about this. She wouldn't listen to me, but she's on Dr. Oz, she saw this. So she started eating coconut oil and rubbing it on her skin. And she had, her medicine cabinet is full of all these creams that she's gone to Walgreens and all these, she's tried all this stuff and her skin just sucks. It's all dry and flaky and got all these barnacles growing on it. So she started about 6 weeks ago to, use coconut oil on her skin. And now she's like telling everybody she's this coconut evangelist out there, getting everybody to use coconut oil on their skin because her skin is really nice. So she's eating it regularly. She puts it on her toast instead of butter, and she smears it on her skin, and her skin is doing great. And it does show that's what our cells are made out of. Our skins, our membranes are made out of that type of fat. They're not made from all these funny fats that are in Jergens lotion. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the studies that have been done. And these are relatively recent studies. These Swedish children, they had a group that were on low-fat diets, and they were fatter, and they had higher insulin resistance. You see this diabetes epidemic in children. It's because this low-fat concept has become so pervasive. When you walk down the shelves in the grocery store, you'll see this big low-fat thing on the labels of so many things. Well, if you take the fat out of it, what happens? It tastes awful, right? So how do they compensate for that? They add sugar, exactly. And so the more sugar, the more insulin resistance, the more prediabetes, the more obesity, and all those things that comes along with it. So it's a gimmick. This low-fat label is a gimmick to sell you stuff. The insinuation is low-fat or low cholesterol is good. It's good for your heart. It really isn't. Whole-fat milk. How many people do you know who say, I drink 2% milk? It's almost like they want a badge and wear it around and say they're 2%. Or they buy zero-fat yogurt, thinking they're really helping themselves out. These studies and Dr. Price's work clearly show we need those fats. We need those saturated fats to survive and to be healthy. So don't be taken in by all this low-fat baloney. But when you think of it, they take all the fat out of the yogurt. What do they do with it? It's cream. They make butter out of it. It's just as expensive as the full-fat yogurt, but they're like double dipping. Cheese and full-fat dairy didn't gain as much weight, probably for those same reasons we just talked about. It tastes better, they eat less of it. Most of it is only energy producing, it's not fat producing. Those shorter chain saturated fats, they make you more energetic. What's the number one thing that doctors hear in their office? The patient comes in, they list their problems. Fatigue, the number one thing that doctors hear. Doctors of all types, they hear fatigue. This is one of the reasons. People are starving themselves for the good fats. This was a great study. They divided these people, heart attack victims, into 3 groups. One they gave only polyunsaturated corn oil, one they gave olive oil, and the other they gave lard. And how did they do? The corn oil, 52% were alive after 2 years. The olive oil, 57%. The animal fat, 75% were still alive after 2 years. So what's that tell you? Corn oil is killing you. Lard is saving you. It sounds so wacky to say it right out loud, but it is really so true. And I really like this study. These are 2 groups of countries. On this side of the graph is the percentage of saturated fat each country eats of their diet. And this is their death rate on this side from heart disease. So here are all these countries, you know, Georgia, Tajikistan, Croatia, who don't get much fat. Look how much greater their death rate is per 100,000 per year from heart disease. And here's the French paradox that you always hear about. You know, here's France. You know, they're getting 17 or 18% of their diet from fat, from saturated fat, and they've got like the lowest heart attack rate of anybody in the world. You know, it's like, what do they have? Pate, goose liver, foie gras, you know, all these great cheeses. Might have something to do with the wine, too. Okay, now there's a sequence of about 5 slides here. And what we're looking at here, the purple is the amount of saturated fat in plaque. So they take one of these plaques out of someone's heart, and what have we all been told that plaque is made out of? Cholesterol, right? Well, it is, you know, close to 40%, actually more than 40% polyunsaturated fat. It's those corn oil fats. You know, I thought, you know, it was saturated fat, it was cholesterol. It's not. You know, these are the monosaturates, these are the saturated, and these are the omega-3s, the top. These polyunsaturates, or omega-6s they're called. Okay, this is in your blood, you know, this is the amount floating around in your blood. Part of the reason there are more polyunsaturates in your blood, in your serum, because it's the watery portion of your blood, is the polyunsaturates are more soluble in water. You know how greasy lard is because it's saturated. The more polyunsaturated it is, the more soluble it stays. So one of the ways our body uses these LDLs is to keep the fats in solution in our serum. Adipose tissue, this is the fat. You know, this is the roll around my middle. Okay, so as you look at this series of slides, we go then to polyunsaturates. And you can see how much of this red omega-6 there is. You know, this is corn, cottonseed, sunflower, safflower, soy. Very little omega-3 is at the top in almost all of these. Some of them like none. And here's the cottonseed, you know, here's the Crisco one. Not much saturated fats, you know, a slight amount of the monosaturates. Then we go to olive, peanut, sesame. You know, sesame being a seed, it's going to have more polyunsaturates. So actually, the more you move to the left here, the better the better the mix. And then we go one more click. These are animal fats. All these saturates come in, a lot more or a lot less of those polyunsaturates. You know, those omega-6s, and you know, plenty of the good monosaturates in the middle. So if we just kind of look at this series again, look at the red, less red, and way less red. The blue, the next slide points this out. The blue are those short and medium term saturates. So it's the length of those saturated fats. Remember about the 5th or 6th slide I showed you? All those saturates from coconut and butter. That's what these are the free ones. These are the ones you can eat as much of them and they won't make you fat. They do nothing but give you energy. These are these tropical oils that were so vilified. And that was part of Madison Avenue when they're trying to sell people margarine, was vilifying saturated fat, cholesterol, and tropical oils. You know, they were like, oh, scaring everybody. I can remember seeing a short, and it was a picture of a tramp steamer, and the hold of it was full of coconut oil sloshing around, and there was some coconuts floating around in there and palm fronds. And, you know, it looked gross, because here's this rusty old boat, and they were trying to associate this, you know, what looked like really unsanitary conditions with this bad oil.
Whether you're a first-time jewelry browser looking for an extraordinary engagement ring, a couple celebrating your 60th anniversary, or you're just looking to treat yourself or mark an important event, Prothheim and Swanson Gemworks is proud to offer custom-made selections handcrafted in America. Silver, fine-colored gems, diamonds, and gold jewelry, as well as strands of lustrous quality pearls. From ring and watch appraisals to in-house jewelry design and repair, ring sizing, remounting, to a complete rebuilding, you can rely on them to keep your old favorites looking new. K&S Gemworks, Muskegon's community jeweler. Memories made one at a time.
And I should, maybe I'll back up here a little bit and just kind of point out what trans fats look like. So when we look at these fats, you'll notice the unsaturated bond is all on the same side. It's called cis pattern. This is how Mother Nature does it. A trans fat, they flip this unsaturated bond over on the other side. And all of our enzymes, our liver that breaks these things down, when it comes reading along here, it gets to that trans junction, it doesn't know what to do with it. It's like, oh, I only have American standard, and this is in metric. I mean, it just doesn't compute, it doesn't digest. So the polyunsaturates will stay in your system 2 or 3 times as long. They go through your liver, and your liver like kicks them back out, says, I don't know what the hell to do with this. So the problem with hydrogenated fats is they create those trans fats. So if you're going to get peanut butter, it's good to get the stuff that at least the oil still floats. You know, organic is definitely important, you know, because it isn't loaded with all the pesticide residues, the Roundup. You know, those things really disrupt your metabolism. Right. Yeah, if you just grind up peanuts, yeah, you get.
Okay, but I use the natural peanut butter, and it's no salt or anything, it's just peanut grind up. And that's the thing?
Well, it's way better than Jif. I usually recommend that people don't eat, you know, a peanut butter sandwich every day. I see a lot of patients with joint pain, and they end up, I mean, a lot of them have gout or pseudo-gout from eating too many of the bean family, you know, processed beans, and peas and peanuts are that same family.
Okay, so peanut butter that's natural, do it cause gout also?
It will definitely aggravate gout. If I eat peanut butter 3 days in a row, my big toe hurts so much I can't walk.
The reason why I asked, that's what I eat on my toaster. When I have toast, I don't put butter on it, I use natural peanut butter.
Well, we usually recommend switching to, at least some of the time, to almond butter or walnut butter. You know, one of the tree nuts, as long as you're not allergic to tree nuts. They're a lot better oil profile. It's important, though, because of the oils, there are polyunsaturates in these things, that you keep them in the refrigerator, you keep them in the dark. You know, you don't buy too big of a vat of it, because as soon as you unscrew the lid, the oxygen starts to break down the fats, and you start to get some of this rancidity. So, I mean, nuts are fine, and Lisa can actually address that better than I can, but Weston Price found that people soaked their nuts for a long period of time, they fermented them. You know, that's what natives have done over the years to render them more digestible and less of a metabolic interrupter.
I've ate Jif for like 50 years now. It hasn't bothered, I mean, it may bother some people. I haven't tried for it so far. I was curious about that. I'm glad you're talking about it. 'Cause I'll have to look
Oh, you eat a lot of Jif?
every day pretty much.
You want to see what your heart looks like?
Yeah.
The one on the right. Hopefully you got plenty of antioxidants to compensate for that, but yeah. I mean, they've known the problems with trans fats for 40, 50 years. It was only this year where they made them start taking them out of food, or even, I mean, it took, what, maybe 10 years ago they started putting on the label that there's this many trans fats. But so many things that we do create trans fats. Like, how many of you remember what McDonald's French fries used to smell like? You'd drive by. I mean, did you hear that? Whoa, yeah. You'd drive by and it was like, oh, I got to go get some of those. For the first 30, 40 years of McDonald's, the fries were cooked in beef tallow. And in the 70s, when this whole cholesterol scare came out, you know, the corporate people wanted to put cooked in vegetable oil on their label, so they switched it to cottonseed corn oil. And unfortunately, they absorb about 60% more oil when you cook them in vegetable oil, and you have all this trans stuff. And they taste awful. You know, they're all kind of soggy and gooky, and before they were like, oh yeah. So if you're gonna do any deep frying, get tallow, lard, or coconut oil. You know, they're the saturated ones that can stand the heat. You don't get those peroxides on all those bonds. They don't have any of those open bonds we talked about that are where the fragility is.
So is a high flash point a significant thing that...
An indicator?
An indicator? Or
A high...
like canola oil is a high smoke point.
Yeah, a lot of the oils like canola and even peanut oil will have a higher flash point. But a lot of times they've been manipulated to do that. I mean, canola is, nobody should eat canola. Canola should be like made illegal. You know, it should be banned.
What about butter flash point?
Well, butter, ghee actually has a better flash point than you know, regular straight butter. So you can clarify it. There's some ghee in the back there and some information on that tonight.
What'd you call it? Ghee?
Ghee, G-H-E-E. It's just clarified butter. You know, when you melt butter, you got the liquidy portion and that kind of translucent portion. There's more like protein and stuff in that portion. Okay, so this goes right back to what Lisa was saying. This is what Weston Price found. The proportion of polyunsaturates, and this is in red again, so it kind of get it in your head. These are polyunsaturates. Primitive diets, whether they were in the Alps or the tropics, no matter where they were, they had a very low amount of polyunsaturates. And what do we have? You know, 5 times that amount. Typically, the omega-3 to omega-6 levels in diets, you know, in healthy native diets are like 1 to 1 or 1 to 2. Ours are as much as 1 to 20 or 1 to 30. The pro-inflammatory, the omega-6s, we get way too many of. And then there's a couple more slides and I'll turn you back over to Lisa. This is my blood from a couple months ago. And these are all my omega-3s and my 6s and my 9s and my monos and my saturated. Then there's some oddly numbered ones, and then here are my trans, and then these are the ratios that determine how much inflammation that I have. So this technology has been available for a long time. If you're curious, you can run these tests and see where you're at. Now, a Jif eater will probably see a lot of these high trans fats, okay? People who take, how many of you take fish oil supplementation? Okay, so a lot of you, you know, at least a third of you take fish oil supplementation. We will see, you know, reasonable levels of the omega-3s up here. This one is the one that's in flax. These 3 are the ones that are in fish oils. I look at this and think, maybe I ought to take a few more fish oil pills. I take them, but we can always tell when we run this test on patients who's taking the fish oils and who aren't.
What test is that called if you were to ask for that?
It's part of a profile called an ion test that looks at your amino acids and a bunch of other jazz too. But you can ask for a fatty acid profile, a plasma fatty acid profile.
By fish oil, do you mean cod liver oil?
Well, cod liver oil is going to have, the EPA and the DHA. It's also going to have more vitamin D and more vitamin A in it than if you just took, the fish oil itself.
So cod liver oil is better than fish oil.
Mm-hmm.
Where does flaxseed oil fall into?
Well, flaxseed oil is this first one up here called ALA. Okay. And your body can convert ALA into the others, but it does it at a pretty low rate. So it's kind of a rate limiting factor. The EPA one is the one that's so cardioprotective. The DHA one is the one that's so neuroprotective. Like mother's milk has just a ton of DHA in it, because of the developing nervous system.
How would you compensate if you have an allergy to fish and seafood?
Well, you won't be allergic to the oil. When you have an allergy, your immune system is taking exception to a protein, but you don't become allergic to sugars or fats. So you could do the oil because it has all the protein taken out of it. Well, be curious to run a test like this and see where you're at. Because if you've been really avoiding fish, you may find that yours are really low and that you're at some risk. You may be able to compensate by taking a lot of flax oil and then really working on your liver to make sure you can convert that optimally. And in the grass-fed butters and those kind of things, you're gonna have more of those too.
What about the difference between eating the flax seeds ground and as opposed to oil?
I mean, that's a great question. Eating the flax seeds, it's got a lot of great soluble fiber in it that really helps your gut. It's really vulnerable as soon as you grind it. So if you're going to eat it, grind it and eat it. Even after a matter of a few days, when you've opened it up, you opened up those little capsules, it starts to peroxidize.
Even if refrigerated or frozen?
Well, that slows it down, but I always recommend if you're going to eat flaxseed regularly, you have a little grinder. You can grind it just like in a little coffee grinder,
right,
and just eat it as fresh as possible.
My mom has macular degeneration, and my eye doctor said that there's a link between flaxseed oil and macular degeneration.
I wonder what the link is. You mean like over consuming it?
Yeah, if you eat, I guess, flaxseed oil, apparently you're more prone to macular degeneration. I think that's what she was eating at.
I'm not familiar with that connection. I mean, rancid flaxseed oil will cause peroxidation and all kinds of damage. But one of the best things for macular degeneration is krill oil. Krill oil with high astaxanthin amounts in it. You want to get like 12 milligrams of astaxanthin a day. But I've totally reversed a couple cases of macular degeneration with krill oil. Krill are the little crustaceans that live on the surface of the ocean. And then my last slide. I didn't really get a lot into cholesterol, but when we test our blood lipids, we go to the doctor for our annual test, and he runs a lipid panel. Okay, so I think the lipid panel that's traditionally run is very abbreviated. It's total cholesterol, HDL, LDL, VLDL, and triglycerides. And from that, what do you think you can predict?
Heart attack?
Not a whole lot.
You cannot predict a heart attack from that. It's like impossible. But there is something it's very predictive of. I mean, there's a real strong correlation with the likelihood of being prescribed a statin drug. That's like the only thing those 5 things will predict with any certainty. There are these other subfractions So if you have heart disease or you have a family history of heart disease or you really want to be proactive, you'll run a comprehensive profile and figure out what your real risks are. These patterns of LDLs and HDLs, some of these HDLs are incredibly protective, some don't protect you at all. Some LDLs that everybody's afraid of are completely benign. They pose you no risk whatsoever. Some of these small, dense little ones, they burrow in and they cause that damage like we saw in the earlier slides. So I always encourage people, this guy was a patient of mine, we ran this, you can see a couple months ago, and he'd had his second heart attack. After his first heart attack, I said, you know, we really ought to run this test, and oh yeah, I'll get around to it. You know, so like 3 years later, he has this really bad heart attack, and now he's like, okay, I want to run that test. We probably could have predicted and prevented his second heart attack because this tells us exactly he's got a few of these small remnants. He's on statins. They've got his total cholesterol down to 125. I mean, he's so weak he can hardly get out of a chair because he's got statin poisoning. They've like wiped out his cholesterol. So all those things we talked about earlier that cholesterol and saturated fats are good for, he doesn't have. So he's weak, he's hurt, he continues to gain weight, it's aggravated his diabetes. You know, he's depressed, he can't think straight. I mean, it just wipes out all of those systems. So if you have any heart disease in the family, I suggest doing a really comprehensive profile like this. And now Lisa's gonna scare you some more.
Yeah. Have you had enough?
Are you confused and stressed out about your health? We here at Quest for Wellness are ready to provide a peaceful setting to help you sort it all out. We offer specialized massages including rotisserie, hot stone massage, or traditional massage. We also offer a variety of modalities to help you find vibrant, healthy life.
Anybody ever seen those in the grocery store? Yeah, they look so pretty. They look so sparkling. And this is what it took for them to get into the bottles and for them to not smell absolutely terrible. Basically, they took out all the nutrients and they added a bunch of toxic things to it to get it to look like that. But all we have seen is the end product. Try to get a tour in an edible oil company. It's not going to happen because they don't want you to see what things go through, what the seeds and beans go through to get to your shelf. There's that picture that Dr. Dan was talking about. Problems associated with the consumption of the polyunsaturated oils. Everything from cancer to diabetes to learning problems. Yes, it does lower cholesterol, but we know now, or we're learning now, that cholesterol is important to our health and our longevity. Now, Dr. Dan was talking about the polyunsaturates. I'm going to use the terms omega-6s and omega-3s now. The traditional diets had nearly equal, as he said, amounts of the 6 to 3, as evidenced by this graph. You can see the primitive diet here. We had about 2.5% omega-6s to about 1.5% omega-3s. Okay, that's what our bodies are evolutionarily made to process. Our modern diet is not the way it's supposed to be, and it's primarily because of the polyunsaturated oils. So we have, like Dan said, between 20 and 30 to 1, as opposed to 2 to 1. Now, free-range eggs compared to eggs raised in a big confinement house also show a dramatic difference in the omega-6, omega-3 ratio. These birds here are allowed to run around in the sunlight, they're allowed to graze, they're allowed to eat bugs. These guys are being fed, what do you think? Corn and soy? And GMO, we're not even measuring that. And the same thing goes for salmon. You know, we've been encouraged to eat salmon when we go out to eat because, oh, it's got all those good omega-3s. However, if we don't make the distinction between whether or not our salmon was farm raised and wild caught, we're going to be, with the farm raised, we're going to be getting those omega-6s. With the wild caught, we're going to be more apt to get the good omega-3s that we need. Now, the fatty acids between grain-fed and grass-fed meat, you can see down at the bottom, we're going to get a lot better balance. And then we've got a list of the differences in the fats there. But it isn't just the fats that we're getting we're getting more nutrients from the grass-fed meat as opposed to the grain-fed and the confinement animals. So we get a lot more of the fat-soluble activators that Dr. Price talked about, A, D, E, and K. They are in the fat, so we don't want to get low-fat ground beef. We want to eat the fat with our steak. We need that. More minerals, more CLA, which is important for anti-cancer and for weight loss. But all this, we have to eat the fat with the meat. Now, one big simple step that people can take when they're trying to make the transition to better fats in their diet is salad dressing. Sally Fallon, who started the Weston A. Price Foundation in 1999, likes to say that she sees one of the major reasons for our shift into poor health to be because of lettuce. And this is why, because the difference between what we do put on it and what, if we do have a salad, what we should put on it. You know, I worked in the schools for over a decade, got to see those kids have salads with their meals. Got to see them put that ranch dressing all over their salads and their pizza and everything else on their tray. It was in no way, shape, or form heart healthy or healthy in any way, but they liked it. It tasted good. So if we continue to eat commercial dressings, these are the things we're going to get. If we learn to make our own, then these are the beneficial nutrients we'll get. Put in pictorial form, bad rancid oils and bad additives equal the messy Jif artery right there. Yeah. So, how to make your own salad dressing. This is Sally Fallon's recipe. We got mustard, vinegar, flax oil, and no, it is not olive oil, it's olive oil. Okay, did you catch that? So, according to her recipe, we're going to throw in a little bit of mustard in a bowl, add a little bit of that vinegar, stirring it quite rapidly. Add in the olive oil, and if you whip it hard enough, it's going to become an emulsion, so you won't have to have any thickeners. And then, I have to wonder if this isn't Sally's child. She says the next step is to add a little bit of flax oil because she wants to make sure we get those omega-3s You know, we still have to, we want to rebalance it. We just don't want to go all the other fats. So she said just a teaspoon or so, don't overdo. Notice the nice teeth this young man has, she says. This young man has naturally straight teeth because his mother took cod liver oil during pregnancy and gave it to him during his growing years. Cod liver oil, not flax oil, is the key to proper development of teeth and bones. So add a little bit of flax oil. Now the fatty acid profile of the flax oil, you can see that it's a significant portion of omega-3s. And just a little bit of the saturated fats, a little bit of the oleic and the omega-6s, but the majority of it is the omega-3s. So there we're adding a little bit of that, and then you just stir it and pour. Now, I was doing this for a while, and I grew impatient with it. So I just recommend to people, have a jar with a lid, glass jar, always glass, in your kitchen, and before you're gonna have your salad, throw all the stuff in the jar and just shake it up, and then pour it on your salad. And I always grind in some Celtic sea salt, and I have a bottle of organic seasoned salt. It's good. And if you have some juice around the house, throw a little bit of orange juice, a little bit of lemon juice. So, in summary, we got good fats and we got bad fats. We're hoping that we can get the highest quality animal fats that we can afford. We hope that we can know our farmer, that we can ask our farmer if the animals were raised outside, if they were grass-fed. We do have to be careful now, from what I understand. Big agribusiness and less than honest farmers can say that their meat and their milk is from grass-fed cows because the cows were born on pasture, but then they don't necessarily have to be raised on it. So it's important, if we can, to know our farmer, to say how much corn or how much corn silage have you fed this cow? You know, how much has this cow been on pasture? Sally Fallon made these butters. She used store-bought cream for this and raw milk cream for the yellow, and I think it speaks for itself. And that's just a little thought for you to think about this weekend. Have a little bit of pancakes with your butter and your grade B maple syrup from a local maple producer. Because we really do need the fat, guys, and that's the bottom line. That's the message, takeaway message from today.
Living healthy is more than just counting carbs and exercising, it's a lifestyle choice. Embrace sound, natural alternatives, cultivate and sustain a better way to healthy living. The Health Hut offers a wide selection of vitamins, minerals, herbs, medicinal mushrooms, women's and men's supplements, as well as a vast array of skincare and beauty products. Their friendly, knowledgeable staff is always on hand to help you choose the products that best suit your individual needs. The Health Hut. We have your good health in mind.